Oof. How'd you feel about this one? I gotta say, this was.
Let's reserve it for the.
Right.
I have some thoughts. I honestly I'm not going to know one song from the other, quite honestly.
Oh my God, Raph, you gotta put in the work. You gotta fucking woodshed it, my friend.
Welcome to Backtracking, the show where two old friends take a second listen to influential bands' catalogs track by track. I'm Ralph Bagdasarian.
And I'm Dan Fiden. We'll be taking this journey together, Ralph and I, providing context, both personal and historical, on some legendary bands. For our first season, we've picked none other than Rush.
Today on Backtracking, where would you rather be? Anywhere? Anywhere? As long as it's here, listening to me and my counterpart backtracking Rush's 15th studio album, Counterparts. The album was the fullest embodiment of the band's pursuit of a stripped-down rock trio aesthetic and is unlike anything they recorded since their debut. So when will the time be right? Anytime, as long as it's now.
It sure is, Roth. By this time in their career, Ged, Neil, and Alex had developed a predictable schedule. Once again, they took a break after touring in support of Roll the Bones, and then regrouped at Chalet Studios in Ontario to write. They'd work during the week and return home to spend time with family on weekends. But gone was the joyful vibe they experienced when working on material for Presto and Roll the Bones. According to Alex, this was the first album since Moving Pictures for which the band decided that guitar would take a leading role. This, and disagreements about how much keyboard would be used in the studio, exacerbated tension that had built up between Alex and Geddy during the Roll the Bones tour, and resulted in the most discord the band had ever experienced. On top of that, Rush had been influenced by the raw sound of new grunge acts like Pearl Jam and Rush tour openers Primus, and decided it was high time to slime Rupert Hine. But after discussions with a number of producers associated with the newer grunge bands, Rush settled on Peter Collins again. Despite that the closest Collins came to grunge was Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime, the band was pleased.
And so was Collins and his engineer, Kevin Caveman Shirley. The team assembled at, where else? Le Studio, and set about recording. Shirley's approach was decidedly more straightforward than the band had used previously, and the results were readily apparent on the album. Counterparts was unveiled to the world on October 19th, 1993.
So what else did the world see for the first time in 1993? The year 2000 problem, or Y2K, was first described in a Computer World article written by Peter de Jager. NAFTA is signed, and the Church of Scientology is granted tax-exempt status by the IRS.
I think we need to start by acknowledging sad development, and that is that Peter Collins this past week passed away.
Yeah, incredibly sad and really timely. I mean, timely not for him, obviously, but timely for us going back to his return to the band. I think a really interesting album. And, you know, without diving too much into the substance of our conversation about the production, I actually think the production on Counterparts shows how brilliant Peter Collins was, because he really achieved two drastically different sounds out of this band, you know, in the beginning of the 80s and then here in the beginning of the 90s.
And, you know, I heard about his passing from the Real Lurks from Alex Lifeson's Instagram, but he was very vague about it. Like, he was like, farewell. I mean, like, is he retiring? Is he like moving to New Zealand? Like, what's going on? And it wasn't until Geddy more clearly articulated that he passed away, and that, you know, he gave him a more fitting tribute. And then the Rush account, and it was before even the Wikipedia was updated, before anything was on Twitter or X, if you want to dead name it or whatever, live name it. So we tip our hats to Mr. Collins as we eviscerate this album that he produced.
Well, yeah, I want to join you there before we dig into Counterparts. We, you know, sympathies to Rush and all of Peter Collins' friends and family who, undoubtedly are not listening to this. But if you are, thank, our thoughts are with you. And we definitely thank and respect everything that Peter Collins did for this amazing band. And, all of the work that they did together, which has allowed us to dig in so deeply, into all of the albums they did together. So thank you, Peter Collins. You'll be missed.
Yes, and as this is a no spin zone, and as we've neglected to
this is a no spin zone.
Well, no, I mean we've been brutally honest about Neil Peart, the lyrics or certain drum. Well, it's hard to criticize his drumming anywhere, but we've criticized things that he's done. So we're gonna do our best to be constructive in our criticism, as we always aspire.
We do aspire to that.
So what do you want to talk about first with this?
Well, why don't we just go through the basics first? Yeah. So I listened to the remastered digital edition off of Apple Music.
Same here.
48 minutes and 4 seconds, I believe, is the runtime here. And actually 54 minutes and 24 seconds. I'm sorry, I misspoke. 54 minutes and 24 seconds. The album was released October 19th, 1993, which is, of course, Roth, our this is the fall of my freshman year in college. Same thing as
which I think is important personal context, because when you start college, your musical tastes can very often soar in very different directions.
Change. Yeah, exactly. So the album, like many of the albums released since kind of Moving Pictures, went gold in about a month after release. It went gold December 7th, 1993. And Ralph, when did this album go platinum?
Well, tell me.
Never.
It never did. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it never went platinum. And again, I think this is really interesting within the context of Roll the Bones. I mean, Roll the Bones, I think one of the things that we hit on at the end of the second Roll the Bones episode is it is really stunning how commercially successful that album was for the band. But then, you turn around with Counterparts, the follow-up, which I don't want to give away the farm too much. I is a very different album than Roll the Bones, but I don't think is substantively worse. Just the commercial performance was not as good. So I don't know. We'll have to dig into that and figure out maybe what we think.
It's funny. So a little personal story. It doesn't involve driving to Syracuse. It actually involves driving back from Rochester. Actually, I remember I was driving because that first fall after high school. Yes. Some of my friends were going to school in Rochester, Dave Shad was going to not RIT, U of R, and John, Chef Lucas, and I and Dave were all like very close friends, and we would occasionally go out there for the weekend or a night or whatever. I remember driving back once, and John was listening to Counterparts, and he's a Rush fan, but he's not who I think any of us considered being like in that hardcore group of like hardcore Rush fans, like me, you, Roseberry, Ara, Niles. Yeah. And I remember he was listening to Counterparts. So I was like, oh, is this that new Rush album? Like I was already sort of estranged from Rush.
Really?
I was like, oh, interesting.
So you didn't get this one at release?
No, I didn't. I don't know if I ever bought this as a physical media, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think I actually believe, I worked at the radio station throughout college. And we used to, back in those days, you would get tons and tons of promotional CDs for the radio station to play, basically. So all the record labels would just send, every month we'd get whatever, 100 CDs. And the vast majority of them, we kind of, they get filed in the library at the radio station and never played. Some of them get played. Many of them just get tossed, right? Like no one wanted it. But I remember the Counterparts promotional CD coming into the radio station, and that's how I heard the album for the first time. I think I just listened to it. We had a little kind of lounge in the radio station where you could preview new albums away from the broadcast booth and stuff. And my recollection is that I heard this one for the first time in there.
So I don't think I heard it. I don't think I've ever listened to this album like straight through, like until we've done this podcast.
Yeah.
And the way I discovered the album was by discovering some songs from the album, some of which made an impression on me when I listened to them. And so I learned it almost as singles. Over a period of time. And I think honestly, I started listening to it after I'd already moved to LA. I was well out of college. So it was weird. It was non-traditional. This one and Counterparts. And in fact, this one and Test for Echo, which is the next album, they sort of were always kind of the same nebulous kind of album to me. So, unpacking it and sort of differentiating the songs mentally was a little hard as an old man as I am.
Well, I've only listened to, as I said in previous episodes, I had only listened to Counterparts maybe once or twice, and then really have not touched it since the early 90s. I have never heard Test for Echo, literally never. So I am now kind of officially in completely new ground. But I'll tell you, listening to this album, forcing myself to kind of listen to this album beginning to end multiple times. I never jumped around. I listened to the full sequence. I had to listen to it many more times than I've had to listen to the albums for previous episodes just to prepare. I can't tell if it's because I was unfamiliar with most of it or because it's such a different album or because the compositions are not all that memorable. But I really struggled with, it took me probably 4 listens to this album before I was really able to feel comfortable with the songs, develop an opinion about which ones I liked, which ones I didn't, and kind of what the through lines were for the album.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So I think this is interesting in a number of ways. So first of all, and I think this is a good transition into just the production of the album, just sort of broadly.
Great.
And I'm glad you mentioned it in the intro. It definitely feel a grungy kind of vibe to this, and I feel that. In general, you know how we've always said how there's certain prototype albums of Rush? I think this is a prototype album for Rush's final era, and it lasts through the very end,
really?
Even up to not Snakes and Arrows, Clockwork Angels. I think they get a little bit more evolved at Clockwork Angels and Snakes and Arrows. I think that's like sort of a button on the end of their, and I think they went in a vastly better direction with those last two. So spoiler alert, I think, they end on an up. I will say right now, I'll say it now, right? Because people, I would say that their very last song on their very last album, The Garden, is like the fucking perfect last song for Rush. It's just brilliant. Like they could not have asked or crafted a better last song to cap their career as friends, as a band, as everything. So I'll go on record as saying that. So it does get better. So this isn't the end of the line for Rush if you hear us a little pessimistic on it. But they definitely go more grungy here. And they definitely go more rockin' than they've ever been. And I feel that this is the beginning. And if I could go back and amend my eras, I would call this era the riff rock era, because they really get back and just like riff rock. And just like these songs are just like a sequence of riffs, it feels like.
Yeah, it's a little difficult for me to orient myself within the.
That's a great way to put it, actually. I feel
it's difficult. It's a difficult.
Now, I don't know what Asia has anything to do with this, but the continent. But tell us about how you orient yourself.
I have a difficult time orienting myself or orienting this album within the larger continuum of their career, because I haven't heard any of the albums after this. But I will say, when I listened to this album, I was like, fuck, like you just the trope, the kind of the meme is, oh, Presto is the band's return to guitar rock. But really, compared to this album, Presto and Roll the Bones sound kind of very transitional. They really do sound like a middle ground between the 80s synth era and what they did on this album, which is just unbelievably unapologetically heavy.
You're right. And that is a pretty major evolution in our understanding of Rush's catalog from when we set out to do this, or so it shows how context and time all play roles, But, I got it. So coming back to Peter Collins for a second, I think probably the first thing we should talk about here when we're talking about the production, the arrangements, and the overall kind of sound of the album is obviously the band decides to part ways with Rupert Hine, right? Yes.
and they in everything I've read, they made that decision because they were very consciously influenced by a tour that they had. Primus had opened up for them on part of the Roll the Bones tour. They were really influenced by the rawness of their sound. And if you and I were both Primus fans in this era, right?
Probably bigger Primus fans than Rush fans.
Yeah, actually, I mean, we probably did listen to a lot more Primus than Rush, but those first couple of, Primus albums were very raw. I mean, pretty lo-fi aesthetic, musically really, really interesting, obviously, but like not albums that are polished to a very high sheen. And then they also kind of specifically call out Pearl Jam's first record 10 as having an influence on the band. And I think both of those call outs by the band on what was influencing them, are actually do come through pretty clearly in the production of this album. However, I do think it's so weird that, apparently what happened is they interviewed a whole bunch of producers who were more familiar with kind of like, or more associated with doing some of this raw, more grunge like, production for bands. And after all of that, they basically decided, we're not going to get anything out of working with a producer who has produced fewer albums than we've made. So they just decided to go back to Peter Collins. But I mean, I looked through like the albums that he'd produced between the last Rush album and then Counterparts. And really the only thing that I could pick out that seems to provide evidence that he could do something a little bit harder is the album Operation Mindcrime, which is not a particularly raw sound. It's a heavy-ish album, but it's not a raw album.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain aspects like Geddy's bass part on this bass sound on this album. I love. It's very dirty and when it grooves, it's a unique sound, and I really like it. I feel the drums we're kind of getting back into the production here. I feel the drums are a little looser than I like Neil Peart's drums to be. Oh, really? Yeah, they just feel a little more loose. And I feel guitars, Alex's guitars are definitely the hardest we've heard since, pre-Skinny Ties era.
I would argue that this is the hardest guitar that Rush has ever done to date.
You're right, yeah, because even like the 2112 era, or even from the first album, it was like sweet hard, right? It had like this richness to it that's lacking in this. This is like a little edgier, harder. So yeah. I mean, I really kind of went back to some of the early albums, and I was like, gosh, I think the closest they ever came to being this kind of guitar-driven rock trio was the very first album, the eponymous album. And I think they get, they're not like they get soft, but like maybe Fly By Night.
Fly By Night is
a little more complex, but.
Yeah, but I mean, this is really like, and I actually think, well, we can talk about it when we get to Animate, the first song, but I mean, they kind of announced that that's the direction they're going really clearly when you hear Neil count off Animate in the studio. You hear the sticks click and you hear him go 1, 2, you know what I mean? Which you've never heard on a Rush album, and it seems so un-Rush like, you know what I'm saying? And so I really think that they kind of like put that in there at the beginning of this album intentionally to tell listeners like, hey, we're going to really strip this one down. And I have to say, I have my issues with this album that we'll talk about as we get into the songs. Mm-hmm. But I love the production on this album. I love the fact that they got heavy. I love that it's light and a little, or it's loose and a little bit messy. I love that it feels a little bit less rehearsed. I just think it shows you a different side of the band that you really somehow, I think, can forget they're capable of as you get into the 80s, when everything is so polished, so rehearsed, so tight. The live shows are like, so we talked about this before. The live shows are like these perfect reproductions of what's on the album. Mm-hmm. Almost, you kind of forget that they're a band that's capable of just kind of like rocking. And I really like that about this album.
Yeah. But can they roll? So I agree. And it's I agree with everything you said. But I think what really detracted for me is that in this sort of final era of Rush, just generally speaking, I feel that as the band gets more riff rock oriented, Geddy's vocal melodies become more like pentatonic and basic. And they're missing, like Spirit of a Begin the Day with a Friendly Voice. It's missing that melody, although there are some in here. And I can say, though, one of my favorite Rush songs is actually on this album, which we'll get to as well.
Oh, interesting.
Thematically and even musically, I think it's a very powerful song. I think it's probably maybe the second most powerful song after like Manhattan Project, emotionally. Now, I want to, and this is a transition into the album art if you're ready for this one.
I'm not ready for that, because I do want to talk a little bit more about a couple of things that are kind of across the album.
Let's do that, because I got a great transition for the album art.
Okay, so the first thing I want to go back. The first thing is I'm like going back to what you said about the vocals. I do think the vocals on this album are really interesting, especially the way they're recorded. I may have missed this on previous albums, but he really fully adopted doing multiple vocal tracks of the same vocal line, or just minor variations and harmonies. You know what I mean? So he was like double tracking the vocals on almost every song on this album, but very loosely. You know how like, this is a very strange comparison to make to Rush, but you know how you listen to Elliott Smith, particularly his first like 3 albums, he will double track or triple track the main melody line, but he doesn't do it perfectly neatly. So you can hear the slight variations in each of the vocal tracks, even though he's singing the same line. Yep. And so it has this weird kind of like,
it's his trademark. I mean, that's his trademark sound.
Yeah, that's totally his trademark. But weirdly, I totally have that sense on this album of what Geddy was doing. He multi-tracks the vocals on almost every song.
And there's one song where he does like a whole chorus of Geddy's. And I'm like, whoa. But
you know what I mean? It's not super tight the way he does it. So even when he's doing that kind of very like, Alan Parsons Project, like multiple vocal tracks at the same line type thing, he doesn't do it with any of the kind of like, perfection of an Alan Parsons. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like it's much more loose. And again, I think it's just, I'm not sure that I love it for Rush, but I really actually kind of appreciate this approach to recording the album.
Well, I think one thing we agree on is it's very much a major departure from anything that came up before it. And I do believe, and I think you'll agree if you listen to the next, the final albums of Rush, this is the prototypical album for the final era of Rush. And then I would say the last prototypical album would probably be Snakes and Arrows for Clockwork Angels. Yeah. So if you see kids how our at least my eras of Rush has already evolved, just going back and listening to and scrutinizing it a little bit more closely.
Well, this definitely, I mean, this felt to me like actually more of a transition in sound than we got from Hold Your Fire to Presto.
Yes, and this is rare for me to say. This is rare for me to say, but I think there's some validity to what you just said.
Wow, Roth. Last thing I'm going to say generally, and then I'm going to let you hit your amazing transition to the album art.
Well, now you've built it up. I mean, it's going to suck. But anyways, go ahead.
General comment on the lyrics on this album. I think that they're not good. And I think he retreads a lot of ground and he doesn't do it particularly well. I'm just going to say that because I'm going to hit on it a couple of times in some of the individual songs. But if there's one area of this album that I felt kind of let down by, it's actually the lyrics.
Okay.
All right.
We'll get into that in the individual songs. But just as I said that this is a prototypical album with respect to the music, I also think it's a prototypical album with respect to the symbolism they use in their album artwork. So Dan, tell us a little bit about the album artwork. How did it strike you?
I'm going to tell you, Raf, across the board, I think this is an absolutely incredible album cover.
The font of Rush is brilliant and one of my favorites.
And a timeless album cover. I just think that it really is Hugh Syme doing the Hugh Syme thing that he does at his best, like he did it on Power Windows and Signals. He's kind of doing this like interesting visual embodiment of what the album title is. That's a little bit unexpected, right?
Yeah.
But I think it just he does it in a very different way, and it just is very clean and beautiful. For those who haven't seen it, it is essentially a technical drawing, like a blueprint drawing of a nut and a bolt.
Yes.
Right. So very simple. Great simplicity, quite lovely. And the interior art to this album, the all of the art inside, I think is bar none the best interior art of their entire career.
Yeah. And we're talking about like the rooms of Rush. Where would you hang different albums? I think in terms of the artistic merits and the aesthetic merits, this would be front and center above the mantelpiece. The only reason why I wouldn't put it there is because of the music. And I don't want people to ask me, why do you have that album there? Sadly. Right.
Yeah.
So, but the aesthetic of it, like the sort of gold, black and dark, deep blue, I would say this is arguably one of my favorite color palettes, just in general, just that I've seen.
Yeah. I think this is a really, really great album cover. I don't have a single criticism of it. And again, I really would encourage folks who haven't looked at this or ever seen it, go through and find, on like the Rush wiki, there's all of the interior album art that you can see. The interior album art is fun. It all kind of fits within the theme of Counterparts. It's very Rush specific. So there's lots of like in jokes in there. I think awesome pictures of the band that like they've never had such good pictures of the band in any of the other albums. Like they're pretty casual. There's a lot of like, basically
eating dinner.
Yeah. Just like, I think they nailed the art on this album. Just awesome.
I agree. I agree. And one of the, I said Rush eating dinner. That's like one of the images on the interior of the album art. If you haven't seen it, like go on YouTube and look for a video of the band having dinner together. It's like a half-hour video. It's just a joy just seeing these guys, the friends they are, getting progressively, more inebriated throughout the night. Having a dinner together in some private back room of some, fancy restaurant, drinking like very expensive wine. And you just, I think that is like the essence of who they are as individuals and friends. That's sort of an aside. But yeah, it's a fantastic album. In fact, I'm going to seek out a high quality print of this, and I'm probably going to frame it and put it somewhere noticeable, probably in the bathroom, maybe.
Why don't you get an autographed copy of the album and just frame that and put it up?
Okay, Rob. So
all right, listen, maybe for your next birthday, big man.
So let's get into it. So let's tell everyone we're going to be dividing this album into 3 parts. Why are we doing that, Dan? Tell
go
ahead. Don't be shy. Tell them.
We've decided to kind of to keep the episodes short, stick with doing it side by side, the vinyl, but what's on the vinyl track list, right? So I looked up the vinyl track list for this, and on discogs.org, this is a 3-sided album. It says that there is an A side, a B side, and a C side. So we're going to organize this episode that same way, which means we're probably going to end up with three episodes for this. They're probably going to be slightly shorter episodes than normal, but we're going to stick with the format and see how it works. So please, if you like it, if you don't like it, let us know. Send us the email. But Raf, is it time to dig into side A?
Yeah, I'm so animated and so excited to get into this. Let's do it. What's the first track?
All right. First track. You know who wrote it. Lee Lifeson, Peart with the lyrics. It is Animate. It is 6 minutes. 6 minutes, Rafi. 6 minutes and 3 seconds. This might be one of the longest songs they've done since like Hemispheres. So why don't we just give it a listen and figure out what we think? All right, Roth. You want to start with the lyrics? I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Do you want me to start? You want to start?
You start, because this is very, to me, this is a very, lyrically speaking and thematically, it's a very abstract song. Was it to you?
These lyrics just seemed weird to me. They just didn't quite work. So I think, and based on what I've read, what Neil is writing about is this kind of psychological difference and relationship between the masculine and the feminine, and men and women, and the feminine side of men and the masculine side of women, and blah, blah, blah. Like a whole bunch of stuff like that. And I think that is somehow interesting, but I don't think the lyrics work in any kind of good way to really tackle what is a fairly rich topic.
That's why I feel that it's very abstract to me, right? I mean, it's not uncommon to hear songs about personal growth, personal challenges in Rush. I think he's taking it to another level here, and a more abstract level, in terms of how he's using written words to express that. And I've never really, I examined the lyrics more closely for this episode, but when I'd listened to this and when I'd heard it more casually, I just thought it was more about, honestly, I thought it was more about even substances, right? Like how to, get a rise out of yourself. Like if you're feeling sort of dead or numb to the outside world, it's a plea to sort of, feel something, and it was very vague and very broad in its scope. So I examining the lyrics didn't really clarify that for me, quite honestly, because they're just very abstract.
I mean, here's one I'm just going to throw at you. This is the perfect example of how I just don't. It's too much word salad. It doesn't really get you there. A peaceful state, a submissive trait. A man must learn to gently dominate. And I just am kind of
So it's about sex. Okay.
It just doesn't. I don't know. It's like I don't know. I didn't find these lyrics I didn't dislike these lyrics. I didn't find them annoying or anything. And I actually think that after I read a little bit online about what Neil said he was kind of tackling in here, I felt like the idea of what he was writing about was interesting. I just don't think without supporting literature, supporting research about what Neil was trying to do, if I really just had the text to base my assessment off of, I just don't think the text really delivers on what he says he's trying to do. So, my last comment on this one was, what is Neil up to, y'all? I just was kind of like, I'm not really. But anyway, so do you want to dig into the music? Because I think the music, there's a lot, especially for the first track on this album, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. So with the music, this is the first time we're hearing, there's, like you said earlier, there's sort of a more raw, a looser feel to the band, and I think that's clearly evident by the count-in and the drums just jamming, and it's not like a crazy Neil Peart complex drum beat. It's just a straightforward driving rock beat. After
it is totally straightforward. Yeah, totally.
You can hear the room. You can really hear the room, and I actually really like that. Now that you're saying that,
yeah, I just think it is the fact that they open with that. It really sounds, I would more raw than they've ever sounded, and they're doing it so intentionally. They really, really seem to have made this kind of concerted decision. That's what they wanted to do, and I think that this opening track really delivers on it.
Yeah, and there's that string part. I don't know if it's synths or strings, but it has that and this is also very sort of illustrative of this era of Rush. They've had strings before, and they've had even grand sort of soaring strings, but these are a little darker and more pentatonic in their sound, and this is what you're going to hear a lot of in their later albums, with respect to like the strings. They used real strings. I mean, like for Clockwork Angels, they had a full orchestra almost on stage for many of their shows, if not all of their shows. So they start to use strings more deliberately, I think. And this is one of the first times you hear sort of this sort of final era of Rush, sort of string aesthetic in this song towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that this song is obviously very driving, really fun, much lighter musically. I mean, when I say lighter, I mean less self-serious than in some ways than so much other Rush. It just really feels like this is a band that, like, you can imagine these guys, three guys playing this song in a garage. You know?
Yeah, and, I mean, the verses are all riff rock. I mean, just straight up riff rock.
It's just so different for the band, and I really like it. It's not the most interesting song that they've ever done, and I don't think it's the most memorable song they've ever done. But as an album opener, introducing people to what is clearly going to be a very new sound, I think it works really well.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think it needs to be over 6 minutes long, though. I will say that. Like,
I think they're just grooving out. I think they're just enjoying playing these riffs, and they're like, "Don't stop it. We're just gonna keep doing it." You know, it's one of the most popular songs on the album. I mean, it was critically acclaimed. The fans received it. It's got the little star next to it on iTunes.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, this is the song. I remember I was introduced to this because off this album on like file sharing in the early 2000s, in the early aughts, Animate was all over those for this album.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. I would say that I love the transition into the bridge, which is the My Counterpart, My Foolish Heart section. I really like that section of the music in the song specifically.
Yeah, and that leads into a really, really cool guitar solo, I think, too. I do like the guitar solo.
I mean, listen, the guitar solo, the guitar work on this album across the board is not what I think of as classic Alex Lifeson guitar, but it's great. Like, I like it. I think it shows a completely different side of Alex. So I like this song. I'm not going to say this is one of my Rush favorites, but not a bad tune, and definitely heavy.
Definitely heavy, I think, is what we can say about this song.
All right. So do you want to move ahead to Stick It Out, Raf?
Yeah. So Stick It Out. Second track off of the Rush album Counterparts. This comes in using the remastered version on iTunes. This comes in at 4 minutes, 31 seconds. We'll listen to it and we'll be right back with you. This whole album is sort of like overtly sexual. I mean, like the bolt going into the vagina. I mean, the bolt going into the nut. I mean, even Stick It Out. What's going on with these guys? Are they having like a middle-age crisis? Is that what this album is?
Well, listen, I will say that let's talk about these lyrics. I think that these lyrics work substantially better than Animate. But I may be reading way too much into this and kind of applying a whole lens based on my knowledge of kind of what the guys have said after the fact about the influence of grunge on this album. But these lyrics to me feel very Tom Sawyer-ish, but they almost feel as though they're directed at the bands and the people who are listening to the grunge bands, right? If you think of Nirvana lyrics and the kind of angst and like anger and dissatisfaction that runs through a lot of the lyrics of a lot of the bands during that era, and then also the public persona of a lot of those bands, it was like illegal to look like you were having fun being in a band during the grunge era. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, really, everyone had to look like they were the most pissed off ever at the idea of being a rock star. You know what I mean? It was just like the exact opposite of like the 70s. You know what I mean? When like rock stars like loved being rock stars. In the early 90s, the grunge bands, they all had to look like they were completely miserable. And I feel like these lyrics in some ways are directed at those bands and the fans of those bands. You know, don't let your anger kind of like burn you up inside. Like, you know, and that's what I think he's saying very specifically in the lyrics. I don't know that he's directing at that, but I feel like the lyrics in this song are as influenced by grunge and that whole aesthetic, except they're not adopting it. They're kind of like, in a weird way, adopting the musical aesthetic, but rejecting the lyrical aesthetic. Do you buy that thesis?
I don't. I think it's more of a motivational anthem, which we've heard many of these in Rushdom. You know, and I think this song is sort of the most emblematic of why Rush kind of lost me, maybe you too, is, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I know you, when you've gotten to college, you got more into like mope rock and like folk rock and stuff like that. So, and I didn't get into neither. I mean, we were into grunge like in high school a little bit, like briefly, but it sort of faded as quickly as it came. And then we went into different directions. And I was actually more into like more Canadian type of folk rock and pop rock and like new age and like Europop type of stuff than I was into grunge. And what was going on in the States at the time was all grunge all the time, right? You couldn't escape it. It was everywhere. And it started to get stale. Like I think it was more stale than disco, if you ask me. And I think Rush, like, I almost feel like, and I hate to say this because Rush has never been a band to follow trends, but they also have been a band to be highly influenced by what was going on in music at any given time. Yeah. And I feel that Rush couldn't help but be influenced by what was going on with grunge, music taking a harder, more casual kind of turn. And it doesn't suit them well. I don't know. I shouldn't say that because they influence so many of these grunge bands, right?
Yeah, I know, but I think that happens. Like, they influenced everybody, and then they continue to be influenced. I think that's good.
Maybe what it is that they influenced all these bands, and now they were being influenced by the bands they influenced. So it's kind of like the universe folding in on itself.
Yeah, I will say, Raf, that I think I agree with the underlying comment that you have, which is essentially it feels as though on this album, this is going to be, I may be overstating this, but I feel as though Rush feels lost on this album. They know the sound that they want to go for, and I think they were genuinely influenced and excited about doing a much more raw, heavier album. But I don't think the songwriting really clicked for them on this one. I just think the songs mostly are pretty forgettable, but the production, the performances are really good. Honestly, it's the same that I feel about like Roll the Bones, honestly. I think Roll the Bones had the same, they just seemed a little bit lost, with the exception of like Ghost of a Chance, which I think is an amazing song. Mostly it doesn't have this like clarity of purpose that I think exists on so many of their albums across so many eras. I that's not to say that I think this is a failure of an album, because I really do love hearing Rush in this raw, gritty, heavy mode. It's so interesting and refreshing to hear them do that. That's like another tool in their tool shed that clearly they have. But but I wouldn't say that like on a song like this, it works for me. But I will say, just getting back to this song specifically, Roth, is the opening riff in this song the heaviest that has ever been played by Rush ever?
I have to think about it.
Why don't we play the opening riff right now so everyone can hear it, and then we can talk about it. But okay. I am going to make the argument that it is so heavy, it is so foreboding, and there are these feedback overtones that are kind of playing behind it. It is very, very grunge influenced. I mean, it is very like Alice in Chains.
I mean, harder than Working Man?
Why don't we just listen to it right now?
Okay. So I don't. It is harder than Working Man. I mean, Working Man might be more rockin', but this is more. This is darker.
It's dark. It's heavy. It's like, you're getting into kind of a.
And I almost wonder if they drop it down to a D in this one. It almost sounds like they do.
Really? Are you going to figure that out right now?
I'm going to look.
He's going to look on the internet. Yeah, I just think that this is an incredibly heavy song. And there are moments in this song that are just like really, really heavy. Again, I really like it. I think there are some things that I like about this song. I don't mind the lyrics. I don't think they land really for me, but I like this. I like in the chorus, they have that spit it out, stick it up, whatever it is. Like that kind of like shout along section of the chorus. And then Getty comes in and sings the line. I think that's a very kind of crowd participatory way of writing lyrics in a chorus. And you can imagine like a heavy band in a small club that everyone knows this song, like that would be a really great rave up moment. So I do kind of like that they're doing a bit of that, which I think is very unlike what I think of as Rush. So there's a lot that I like about this, but I'm just gonna have to say again, it just doesn't land for me for reasons that I can't entirely put my finger on. Yeah,
it is dropped to D, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that explains why it sounds so foreboding.
Working Man wasn't. It wasn't.
How much drop D? I mean,
they didn't have the money to drop to D. That took too much time and money. They were in a budget back then.
But like, think about all those grunge bands. Like Soundgarden was always drop D, right? Or I mean, it seemed like, especially in the early years, it was just like everything they did was kind of drop D. And I don't know about Alice in Chains, but I suspect that there was a lot in there. I don't think really Pearl Jam did as much of that, but like a lot of those kind of popular grunge bands, that was a real hallmark of that sound, right? That drop D thing, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It absolutely was.
So listen, more grunge influence. Are we kind of like circling this idea, Roth, that maybe this album was too heavily influenced by grunge?
No, if I didn't say that from the beginning, I think I said that's why it kind of lost me, is that they were sort of in between grunge and where we were. And I remember listening to this during the time when we were driving back from Rochester. And I was just kind of like shrugging, like, like I always felt like it was neither here nor there. Listening to it now, I appreciate it a little bit more, but I'm still like, there's certain songs and certain moments that I really like and appreciate on this. Yeah,
this is maybe we should just move on to Cut to the Chase, shall we? Cut to the chase, Roth. It is Lee and Lifeson, Peart with the lyrics, 4 minutes and 48 seconds. Song number 3 on side A. Let's go. You may be right. It's all a waste of time. I guess that's just a chance I'm prepared to take. A danger I'm prepared to face. Cut to the chase. Just a danger I'm prepared to face. Cut to the chase. So the lyrics, I think the chase is really the kind of like the concept that holds these lyrics together. Lyrically, this song is definitely about that sense of drive and ambition that sometimes is for its own sake, right? It's just the drive that many people have, just to do more, to accomplish more, to move faster, to make more stuff. And it isn't always about the ends. It's just sometimes that's the reward in and of itself. Do you buy that or no?
I do. I mean, it's one of the things that I think was very, I don't want to say telling, but conflicting about this is that what you're seeing here with what we're talking about, even from these first 3 songs, is, from the lyrical side of things, we're very much traditional Rush, what we know and what we're familiar with Rush. Even though they're not the best lyrics, we still sort of get those themes that we're used to hearing from Rush. Musically, though, it's a very different band. And I think maybe this is putting my finger on it, is that there is this sort of cognitive dissonance between these two things, right? Like if they're doing this rockin' album and maybe they had more like, at 7, yeah, and I go to work at night. Like if it was back to those kind of fun, sort of inane lyrics, maybe this would work better. But they're not. They're like very cerebral, very Rush type of lyrics combined with this more, looser, more rockin' kind of, not rockin' in like the Presto and Roll the Bones rockin' style, but like this new sort of grungy rockin' style. And I think that it sort of brings about a bit of cognitive dissonance for me, at least. And I think that's sort of, I'm like finally, after all these years, able to put my finger on what is it that's sort of, and unsettling might be too strong a word, but like unsettling about this album for me.
Yeah, I will say that I do think that in particular, I said this up front, and I think this song is a really good example of how much of a retread some of these lyrics tend to be, right? Like if you look at the last 2 stanzas of this song, tell me that they are not almost directly like a direct ripoff of Rush themselves. Young enough not to care too much about the way things used to be. I'm young enough to remember the future. The past has no claim on me. I'm old enough not to care too much about what you think of me. I'm young enough to remember the future and the way things ought to be. Okay, so that young enough not to care too much is literally a line from another Rush song, is it not?
Young enough, old enough not to care too much.
Yeah, young enough not to care too much, old enough not that. Like, I actually think that those lyrics are not.
Would it be New World Man? Would it be from New World Man?
It could be New World Man. I couldn't figure out. I couldn't find the song, but there is a song where like that actual mechanic exists.
But there's a line. There is a line. It's not this line exactly, but it's he's young enough to win the world, but old enough enough
to lose it. Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you that this is. I'm not saying that in a way that like I hate that. I don't mind it, but it just is an example of, I feel like they're kind of lyrically going over the same ground again, and not, for me, they're not really saying anything. They're not saying it better. They're not saying it differently in an interesting way.
No,
it's not quite as effective.
Yeah, the line is he's old enough to know what's right and young enough not to choose it.
Yeah. Is that not very evocative of this here? It is. It is.
Maybe, yeah.
Yes, it's very evocative, Ralph. All right. So now why don't we, but I mean, listen, this is like, again, kind of lyrics just kind of feel like a retread to me. Now, the music, one thing I want to point out to you, Ralph, there is tambourine in this song, and I believe it is the first use of a tambourine across any Rush song ever recorded. I could be wrong about that. It's possible that there's some tambourine somewhere in the catalog elsewhere, but it almost sounds to me as though on this track, Neil, they have those tambourine attachments that kind of clip onto the top of your hi-hat. And so when you operate the foot pedal of your hi-hat, it'll also operate a tambourine. I believe it almost sounds to me as though he has one of those that he used on the recording of this song. It is the fact that it's on there, I think, just contributes to this very again, loose, organic, very raw, analog sound to this recording across the board. But I also just thought it was kind of interesting. Like, wow, Neil's using a tambourine, and that may be the literal only piece of percussion that he has not used.
Could be Peter Collins. It could be Ged.
It could be. But
do we have any live versions of this song and see who's playing the tambourine?
I think
they had a tambourine girl come out and play it.
I think it is the only use of tambourine on the whole album. This is something that, listen, there's somebody out there who is like a total Neil Peart Rush expert who probably knows the answer to this definitively. I would love to know the answer, but my assertion is that this is the first use of tambourine in the entire Rush catalog.
I ascertain you're right. I ascertain.
Okay. Another thing
That's a little
musically
Kids in the Hall reference for those who are listening.
All right. So another thing that I wanted to call out here, I'm going to call it out here. And I prepped you with this one a little bit, Roth. Now, I sent you a few days ago a link to a video, a Maya Rudolph video. Did you happen to watch that video, Rafi?
I did. The key change.
Key change.
You know, and I tried to one up you, and I tried to find a deep Benny Hill cut where he's singing, "Please release me, let me go," and he's constantly changing keys. Like the pianist is constantly changing keys, which I think, knowing Maya Rudolph, I'm sure she goes deep on comedy. She probably was inspired by that.
Well, it's just I think that there's this, I actually don't even know what the source of this skit is, but it's Maya Rudolph in kind of this lounge singer outfit, lounge singer kind of like set, singing some song. And she sings like a verse, and then it goes into this chorus, and the lyrics are basically like, "Key change, baby, I'm doing it." And then every time she does the chorus, she just does the chorus again and again, and they change keys every time she does it. It's just really, really funny. This album reminded me of that skit. I commented a few episodes ago, Rafi, that I noticed in one of the choruses, I think on Presto, might have been earlier than Presto, but I noticed like, oh yeah, they did a key change in this, like the second time they went through this chorus towards the end of the song. That's something that lots of other songwriters, do, but not super, super common for rock bands.
No, I was going to say for show bands, like for show.
Yeah, yeah, it's like one of those things that I think it's, you definitely like, it's a trick, it's a technique that I think you hear in lots of music. Not super common in rock, pretty common in pop, definitely common in like show tunes and stuff like that. But I detected it in some earlier Rush song. On this album, they do so many fucking key changes in choruses where they'll do the chorus, then they'll do it again, and they do a key change. It really seemed it just seemed weird to me, especially within the context of like such a heavy, grungy album. It just like a key change, just like, I don't know, it just struck me as so odd. Is this something that you heard?
I heard it, but it didn't feel out of place for me. I think they did it pretty well. What was more odd for me was like the weird effects they have sort of at the end of this song, like cut to like the reverse I don't even know what it was. You know what I'm talking about? Cut to the chase. Oh
no, when there's like a drum breakdown, but it almost, what it sounded like to me is that they I actually like this effect. And we did it, the Capillaries did it when we recorded at the end of what song was it? At the end of one of the songs we did this. And basically what we did was turned off all of the mics that were directly miking the drums, and then just went to these like room atmosphere mics. And so you just heard this like room sound drums, like just the drums, and it sounds kind of weirdly far away and kind of weird. But I feel like they did something similar in this, where they basically turned off all the mics that were directly on Neil's drums, and then just had a couple of like, omnidirectional mics somewhere in the room, and then he played like this little riff, and then this little like drum break, and then when they all came back in, they switched back to like the normal miking of the drums. This is my guess about how they did that.
Maybe they did it. So by the way, this was released by Atlantic Records, like marketed by Rhino Records. Was this a new label for them, or?
No, they switched labels 3 albums ago. I think they switched labels.
That's right. Yeah, Presto, I remember, was Atlantic. Okay.
Yeah, that was their first Atlantic.
So I was like saying, I wonder if they used the if it was Capitol Records, if they used like the reverb room in Capitol Records.
But yeah, so you didn't like that? I thought that was one of the, but I kind of liked that moment in the song.
I didn't dislike it, but it was just kind of like, huh? Like, the cat that goes, huh?
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah. The big fat cat goes, huh? That's what I felt like. I felt like the cat meme.
Well, listen, I think there are some weird things about this song. Again, I feel like this is going to be a continued struggle for me on this one, but I don't. There isn't anything I can really put my finger on to say why this song. I don't dislike it, but I don't love it, and I can't quite tell you why. It just doesn't quite click with me perfectly.
You just described the entire album for me, though.
No, I think that's true. I think that's true. All right. Well, listen.
So there's no specific moment in this song that makes me feel that way. Maybe that little drum. I don't even know what you would call it. Like, what is it? Is it drum interlude?
Yeah, drum break.
Drum break. But there's also like sound effects and.
Yeah, there is. There's almost like a flange on it or something as well. There, yeah,
that's the word. There's a flange on it. It is a flange.
Yeah. Well. All right, Raph. Well, listen. Do we have anything else to say about Cut to the Chase?
I don't have anything to say about Cut to the Chase, but the next song, I do have a lot to say, and I think it's going to take a more positive turn. So, introducing it, it's called Nobody's Hero. Comes in at 4 minutes 55 seconds. Track number 4. This is the last track on side A of Counterparts Remastered. This is Nobody's Hero by Rush.
But he's nobody's hero. Saves a drowning child. Cures a wasting disease. Hero. Lands a crippled airplane. Solves great mysteries. Hero. Not the handsome actor. Plays a hero's role.
Nobody's Hero. Yay!
Yeah, okay, Rob. You want to talk about...
So this song, finally we're at a song where musically, lyrically, I connected with, right? And this was the song that I downloaded off of like a file sharing site or something. Like this was a song that got me into this album, and it was like had me give a second listen to it or give it a second chance.
Really?
Lyrically, what it's about, I think it's very deep. I think it's very touching. I think it's excellent. Right? It's basically about how the people who contribute most are very often the ones who are most overlooked, but they're the true heroes. And I don't know if I mentioned it on this podcast, but I mentioned it to someone, maybe I did on this podcast, where, as a society, especially in America and maybe the UK, we tend to love redemption stories, right? We tend to love people who did really, really bad, fucked up things, but then seek redemption, and now we put them on a pedestal. And I was always like, well, what about the people that never fucked up, but are heroes nonetheless? They don't get any attention whatsoever. And this song is essentially an ode to those people. And it has and I mean, I don't want to jump ahead to the music, but I kind of have to do that to give the lyrics context, is that it has a very sort of epic, sort of heroic kind of aesthetic to it, especially during the choruses. So I really like this song. It's one that I regularly listen to. I reference it. It's part of my secular Rush Bible.
Really?
Yeah, I like it.
Well, before we move on to the music, I'm going to dig into the lyrics a little bit as well. So before I touch on kind of my thoughts on the more generalized meaning or message behind these lyrics, I think it's probably worth talking about the specifics. So there are two vignettes basically that are included in this song. Again, a very Neil Peartian way to approach lyrics. He'll do first verse is about one character, second verse is about a different character, and they both fit in to, the overall theme of the song. This one, quite personal though, and quite based on Neil Peart's reality. I don't know specifically who the person is, but there is a gay person that Neil was friends with who I think lived in London, and he used to spend quite a bit of time with, hang out in that social circle and whatever. And at some point along the way, that person died of AIDS. And so this is about that person's death. So that is obviously the first. Well,
this verse is about that person's death.
This verse. Yes. This verse. Yes, correct. Now, the second verse I didn't know.
And let me take a step back. I don't think it's about that person's death. I think it's about the courage that person faced while they were alive, and that was an act of heroism.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's fine. We can talk about what the overall meaning is, but I just wanted to call out that first verse is about an actual person that Neil Peart had a relationship with.
I think all of them are. I think the verses are. Yeah.
And even the second verse, it is actually about a woman who was killed. I don't know, Raf, if you remember the Bernardo Homolka serial killings in Ontario that happened in the early 90s. No. Essentially, there was a guy who was like, they were like serially raping and killing young women in and around Ontario in basically Port.
Oh, yes, I do remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the girls that was killed, who unfortunately I did not write her name when I was doing the research down, but one of the victims of those murderers was the daughter of friends of Neil's from his hometown. So basically Neil grew up with this person who later in Port Dalhousie, is that how you say it? I'm not sure how to say it, but Port Dalhousie, who had a kid much later, and so their daughter ended up being one of the victims of this killer, and that's who Peart is talking about in the second verse, which again I think is in some ways uncharacteristic of Peart. He really, I don't know that there are too many other examples of lyrics within their catalog where he's writing about someone very specific, some real life person in his life in a way that's like as direct as this. And I do think that's quite touching. I think that
I think he has, but not as easily identifiable, right? Like, that
may be that.
Where he's giving us such details of the people. Yeah.
Yeah, or listen, and maybe it just be that he revealed that in some interview at some point along the way. That's why it's on the internet and you can find it. But I do think that's something that's a little bit interesting, right? Now I think we can talk about that more generalized thing. I think that's right. I think that I agree with what you had said. He's really trying to articulate here that we should celebrate normal people, in as much as we kind of celebrate the actors and people like that he's kind of dissing in the chorus in most choruses of this song.
Yeah. Because I think Neil Peart, like many people are, it doesn't sound like he's like super frustrated with it, but I can understand how someone might be frustrated with the inordinate amount of attention people who have fame for fame's sake get over those who we should be looking up to. It's kind of like TikTok, right? TikTok, the way it's filtered in China, because it's ByteDance, a Chinese corporation, for kids, they're fed stories about science, art, right? Some more enlightening themes, and are essentially being trained explicitly to value those things, right? To value the scientists who solve great mysteries. Whereas here in the United States, the feeds that you'll get on TikTok are just pretty faces doing stupid shit that are very shallow. And I think if he were alive today to see TikTok, I think he might even include a verse about something like that, or make another song like this that's dissing influencers. One of the things that I think is interesting and a little odd, honestly, about how mechanically he structured these lyrics is throughout the lyrics, he describes negatively who aren't the heroes that he's talking about, right? Yeah.
He says hero, not the hero who saves a drowning child or cures a wasting disease. It's not the hero who lands a crippled airplane or solves great mysteries. It's not the handsome actor. It's not the glamour.
No. It is the people who solve great mysteries.
Oh no! See, I think that's exactly what he's saying. These are not the person. This is my assertion, Roth. there are only two positive descriptions of the type of people he's talking about.
No, you got the lyrics wrong. So, but he's nobody's hero. Saves a drowning child, cures a wasting disease. Hero, lands a crippled airplane, solves great history. Hero, not the handsome actor who plays a hero's role. So he doesn't say not until it gets to the actor in the glamour girl who learns to sell her soul.
All right. Well, let me say that's not how I hear these lyrics. I actually think the entirety of the lyrics are negative until he says, hero, the voice of reason against the howling mob, hero, the pride of purpose in the unrewarding job. Now, you could be right? He may be
right.
He may be right. Hero saves it, cures a wasting, hero lands the crippled, solves great I don't know. I my read of that is that really it's not until that last kind of version of the.
Well, he's saying that man and the woman was nobody's hero, and he's lamenting that by saying it. He's not saying, oh yeah, he's nobody's hero for good reason. No, he's lamenting it. He's by saying, but he's nobody's hero. So he tells him about this guy who, I went to his parties as a straight minority. As years went by, drifted apart. When I heard that he was gone, I felt a shallow cross my heart. But he's nobody's hero.
Exactly.
And then he starts to explain what a real hero is. And then he says it's not the handsome actor who plays a hero's role. Right?
I will buy that. I will grant you that. I'm not certain that I believe that, but I will grant you that. But clearly, he's trying to highlight people that he doesn't think are generally viewed as heroes.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think that sentiment is interesting.
I love that line. Is the pride of purpose in the unrewarding job? Because I tell my kids when we drive by, I don't say it every time, but I said it a couple times where, you'd see the garbage trucks going by and you'd wave, and I would tell them, like, you realize, like, they're doing one of the most important jobs in the city. Like, they're collecting the waste and the trash. Like, and I explained, like, do you know what would happen if they didn't do that? And it is, and they're nobody's hero, right? If anything, people are like, get off the road, you're blocking me, right? But it's remarkably, it's an extraordinarily important job, and you could say it rises to the level of heroism that they do it every day.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to say, before we move on from the lyrics, Ralph, I hear that this is part of the Rush Secular Bible for you. I really like the sentiment of these lyrics. I do. I genuinely do. I do not like the execution of these lyrics, especially the first stanza. I feel like maybe it's just because of, like, today, like, it hasn't aged that well, but it just kind of feels like, I knew he was different in his sexuality. I went to his parties as a straight man. I just feel like those it's just like, ooh, like. No,
I agree and appreciate what you're saying. I don't like. I think there's far better executed lyrics in the catalog of in the secular Bible known as Rush. But it's thematically, I like this.
Or like the Book of Job of Rush.
And if we can get to the music, if we quit yapping about the lyrics, the music is very, like, epic sounding during the choruses, like crescendos to this.
Perfect example, Roth. I want you to go into it. Like, tell me about this music.
So it starts off acoustic, right? It starts off with, like, probably Neil or Alex standing behind his Omega Concern stand, right, with his electric behind it. For those who know what I'm talking about. So it starts off very simple enough, right? And then it gets into during the verse, the first verse, it has this. I don't know what the beat would be. It's kind of it's a little jilty, right? Hurdy-gurdy. It's not like a straightforward rhythm, right? And you help me out here. What is the name of that type of rhythm?
I don't know, but I know the one I don't know what it's called. But
I'm sure there's a rhythm name to it. But it goes into a non-standard rhythm, certainly not for a rock band. and it grows from there. So then the guitar, and I love the guitar interlude, right? The do 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 do. It's very melodic, very Alex Lifeson. That goes into the second verse, and then we're full on electric. The acoustic's still going on in the background there, but you have the drums now and Geddy playing on the bass. But it crescendos towards the end. Nobody's hero, right? It just becomes this very heroic. I mean, it's a truly anthemic song musically, and I think the lyrics rise to the music, and that's what I really like about this song.
Okay, so I think this is an incredibly dramatic song.
Yeah, it's up there with Marathon, right? Or from first to last, the peak. But you know how it crescendos to that like very heroic anthemic sort of ending with the chorus, the voices, and everything. This is in the vein of that.
I will say, all right. So again, Raf, it, in my opinion, it aspires to that level of.
That's called pretension.
It delivers the. I feel like it crosses over into melodrama somehow. And I will say, like, when I listened to it, remember last episode, I was like, there are moments in Rush of this era that it feels like latter day Aerosmith, right?
Yeah, I remember you said that.
Yeah, and we talked about Janie's Got a Gun, and
I don't hear.
No, but hold on, just let me finish. So, remember that I don't want to miss a thing. Remember that one from
that's cheesy ballad.
Yeah. So, but I'm telling you, I was listening to this song, and when the orchestration comes in, so this is live orchestra in this song, right? And I was like, fuck, this song is totally making me feel like latter day Aerosmith again. Why is it? And I actually said, do you remember? I said to myself, I said, Self, do you remember in like the late 80s, early 90s when Michael Kamen was like playing with all of the metal bands, and that was like Michael Kamen and Metallica and Michael Kamen and Aerosmith?
I don't remember that, but
yeah, no, he was like the guy who did the orchestration for every one of these kind of like poppy metal bands. And I was like, God, this reminds me of Michael Kamen. So I like look up who did the arrangements for the orchestra. Michael fucking Kamen.
No,
I'm telling you, yes, it was Michael Kamen, and it felt that way for me perfectly. And it has the key changes in here again. It has the key changes in the at the end of this. They threw all of the high drama shit into this, and I'm not going to say like I'm not trying to trash this song. I think this is a pretty good song. It definitely aspires to Manhattan Project Marathon level of drama, but somehow or another it just doesn't quite work for me as well as those songs. This was a single. It was released, got a lot of radio airplay. It was a music video was made for it, right? It was critically and fan approved. It was critically and fan approved, you're going to say.
Yeah, it was. The critics liked it, the fans liked it. It was good, and there's a reason why Michael Kamen's a working orchestrator, right? So
I mean, listen, I don't know anything about that stuff. I mean, clearly he's very successful, and he has a thing, and his thing is, how do I make this metal band as melodramatic as possible? And he fucking nails it.
Yeah,
Nothing else matters. I mean. Anyway.
All right. So, I mean, that's all I have to say about it. I like it. I think it's a great song about empathy.
Is this one of the songs that's like one of your favorite Rush songs ever?
Yeah. One of my favorite Rush songs. I would put in the top 10.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it's good to have a favorite Rush song that's on this
certainly
album.
From this era. Certainly off this album.
Yes. Well, no, I would grant that. All right. So listen, Roth, we are now at the end of side A.
Yeah. So how do you like it, kids?
That was
a long side A. That was like an hour and a half.
It's a long side A. And we've got so much more to go. So why don't we just wrap it up here for this episode? Roth, you know what the fans need to do, don't you?
They need to subscribe to this podcast. They need to smash that like button. And they need to email Dan at backtrackingrocks@gmail.com if they have any questions, any corrections they'd like us to address on next week's show as we do housekeeping. And really what you can do to help out the podcast, kids, is if you could share it with any Rush fans, if they're not a Rush fan, but they might have gotten into Rush, they want to get into Rush, just send them the link. What's the worst that can happen? They can come to your house and hack you up with a hatchet. But other than that, you really have very little to lose. So find us on x.com, which was formerly Twitter, at Backtracking Rocks, Instagram, Backtracking Rocks as well. You might catch us doing a little story, sending an Instagram story about new episode alerts and whatnot. And again, email backtrackingrocks@gmail.com. What else you got to say, Dan?
Nothing. I have nothing else to say, Roth, except, as always, it's been a delight to spend this time talking to you about Rush, one of our favorite bands ever, to really rediscover everything about the first side of this interesting, puzzling, strange, and unique album. I can't wait to do it again next week when we handle side B. So let's just do that, Roth. Listen.
All right. We'll see you next week, kids.
Bon voyage.